Hey everyone, I guess I'm live here. Let me get adjusted. I just wanted to pop in again. It is Tuesday. We're expecting quite a bit of a storm headed this way and winds 80 miles per hour, everything. So let me get my second window open. That's what I was trying to do so I can give you some feedback on some of the questions that I see pop up on various travel sites as far as traveling. So let me pull that up here quick. And if you have questions, drop them in the chat. I've done a lot of suggestions throughout my chats about New England. That's an area I'm super familiar with. I also go to Alaska quite frequently. And the reason I go to Alaska is because I love the fall colors and the opportunity to see the northern lights. So that might be something you can hit me up with later if you'd like. So let me pop into the forum here and just open this up. I know I look like a wind-blown mess today, but it is what it is. So real quick, gonna give this a shot. All right, and what's up? We have seafood. There's a lot of places to find seafood in New England, and some of the best places are honestly the little lobster shacks. When you're rolling along Highway 1 in Maine, if you are slowing down through some small towns and you see a line of people, that's usually indicating something's tasty there to eat, and you might want to park and check it out. Now, if you don't like seafood, there may be other options. Look and see where there's a lot of cars parked, especially noontime. You're going to see a lot of people out. But oftentimes, even the food trucks parked at places like Portland Head Lighthouse, there's some really good food at those food trucks. So I highly recommend that. And you can also do your research. I like Yelp for finding restaurant suggestions. TikTok is honestly, I know some of us have mixed feelings about TikTok, but there's often a lot of food people that do use TikTok, especially here in Vegas, and give some really good food suggestions. So that's some feedback on seafood and food. It doesn't look like a lot of new things have popped in here. Let me see here. I'm not real familiar with springtime cruise stops from Montreal to Boston unless you tell me which stops, where you're stopping. Here's a New England summer 2023, which I've commented on before. Holiday weekends are going to be super busy. If you know that's the time that you need to take to spend with your family, plan ahead. And often, if you want to stay in a really busy place like a Kennebunkport or a Bar Harbor, find a place that you can stay where you can leave your car parked free for the day and just use your feet, make use of public transportation. That way, you've already got your parking spot. You're already set, so you can go out and enjoy the activities, enjoy the hubbub as you will. And if it gets too crazy, you can walk back to where you're staying, take a nap, hang out, just people watch. That's always a good tip. If you're staying out and trying to go into those places, then you're stuck in that, just sitting there rolling through traffic, which along Highway 1 on certain highway weekends happens quite frequently, for one. And I'm sure other towns in the summer, Cape Cod, some of those areas as well. So sometimes even looking outside, small towns, try to move your trip either to start at the beginning of a holiday weekend and pick a spot and kind of plant yourself there, or at the end of the trip. Those are some ways to avoid that. This one, it looks like I've seen a lot of interest in Montreal lately, and maybe because the Canadian dollar and the American dollar are more in line. I'd have to check that currency conversion. It hasn't been something I've investigated recently, but I do know there is a bus from Montreal into Vermont. You can sit on the bus for quite some time, but another way to get into Vermont, find a place to go, especially if you're hooking up with a tour group or something like that. I like this person's suggestion. Go all the way to the northernmost point of Maine, Lubec, which is a fabulous town. Really is. You're right on the coast. It's not overdeveloped of Maine, Lubec, which is a fabulous town. Really is. You're right on the coast. It's not overdeveloped. You can take the bridge, the Roosevelt Bridge to Campello Island. There's some really beautiful places there. Now, it will be colder up there longer. Just do your research. Just like who knew this weekend this week we're going to get this major storm blowing through. So let me hop back to the forum here quick and see what else we have. I often search these by state. Like if you're going to an area, you're going to do a road trip on TripAdvisor, you can pop those questions into different places on the forum. Let's see. Let's go to, how about we pop into Vermont? No, how about we do New Hampshire for a hot minute? I'm going to keep this kind of short today since I can smell my lunch is being made. So here's a question yesterday, peak fall color. It's super hard to predict this many months out when peak color will be, but you can look at past information. You can also look at the Weather Channel, the Forest Service. Jeff Foliage does a great job of pulling all that information together. Columbus Day historically is generally always been a great time because you have the widest area that has a good mix of fall colors. And being that New England's tight, you can go a little bit north, a little bit south, a little bit east, a little bit west, and hit a pocket. But I would check out Jeff Foliage if you've not checked out his website. It really has great information, past pictures. He also has a Facebook group that has a lot of photos with dates as to when they were posted. You're never going to outguess prime fall color. Some years are better than others. Last year was a drought, and surprisingly, it was one of the best years I had witnessed for fall color in probably a good 10 years. And I'm not joking. And it's hard to hold in my enthusiasm when I'm leading a tour to tell people, like, wow, it's amazing. Or if you have repeat friends that travel with you, sometimes you hate to say, yeah, this year's, but they, people start to see that through the photos. Some years are better for reds than oranges, just the mix and the health of the trees. But I was stunningly shocked last year of how beautiful the fall colors were. So Mother Nature is fickle, and some years I've seen fall color late. It'll start late, it'll roll late, meaning you can still capture fall color all the way down to Halloween weekend, barring any big rainstorm or a wind coming through that area. So, go and plan your trip and look for other things to do as well. So let me go back here. Please review my itinerary. Here's one from February 16th. Utica, New York to Stowe. As I've mentioned, Rome to Rio. Google Maps, even Travel Math can give you a good sense of how far that is, different ways to get there, and some halfway points. So if you want to split up the day or a couple stops, so you get a lunch and a coffee stop, I think that's always good on long drive days instead of just assuming it's a full day of driving. Planning a couple interesting stops, that always makes it more interesting. Let's see. These people are looking for quilt shops. There's lots of those in New England. You can literally Google any special interest you have and find it. Meetup.com is sometimes a good resource too, because you can search meetup.com, and as a user, it's free. And you often can look for special interest groups, whether that's quilting, needlework. And if they're located in that area, they're going to be great resources of information. The auto road to Mount Washington. I like how these people are leaving it open because, again, depending on the weather, if it's fogged and clouded in, you're not going to see anything but a bank of clouds, and it's not going to be that interesting. You'd rather spend your time then on the ground in the, walking through the leaves, exploring, doing something else. If you've got mobility issues like hard knees or stairs, it's the Flume Gorge that has all the multiple staircases that they take out each year when the freeze comes and have to literally rebuild. But it's got waterfalls. But instead of doing that, check out the basin. It is right off the interstate. There's an exit marked the basin, and you park, and it's a really accessible trail. It's got a few steps in places, but for the most part, there's a lot of flat rolling areas that make it very accessible. Cog railway tickets, I would wait again closer to the date so you can kind of check out the weather patterns. Yes, sometimes they sell out, but recently, a day or two out, you should be able to still get a ticket and make that day interchangeable, only because, again, it's no fun to sit on that cog railway into a bank of clouds. I think I remember that as a kid, which is why I wasn't super excited to go back, but I did recently do it here in the last couple of years, and it was an incredibly clear day. I saw for miles and miles. We drove up through the color, and it was fascinating. It did take a chunk of time. It did take about 4 hours out of my day. So that is something to be aware of, that you do have to dedicate a good chunk of a day to it. So depending on what else you want to do, it may or may not be the best choice for you. We're past President's Day weekend. Easy hikes. Uh, it, there's books all about waterfalls in New England, and all dedicated. I think alltrails.com is a great website to consult on this as well, because if you go to alltrails.com, they really spell it out as far as the parking situation, how long the trail is, what to see, how many steps, how accessible it is. I mean, some of them you really have to be wanting to clamber through the woods and have good ankles, be up for that, and checking the mud. So those are good. That's a good website. There is a waterfall. There's a couple right off of Route 100 in Vermont that are right off the edge of the road, so super easy, no hard climbing or trails required. And like I mentioned, that basin in New Hampshire. There's smaller waterfalls, but if you're a photographer, you can have a lot of fun, and they all sound a little bit different, just the way the water's hitting the rocks. So that's an option as well. So let me go back here quick to the forum and see what else we have here. Let me pop into the Maine forum. It's one I haven't been into recently, but as I said, Maine is a state that often gets overlooked, and there's a lot of trees and forests there. There's moose tours where they take you out hunting for moose. You've got, I mean, it's actually a lot of state to kind of unpack. It's not just Acadia National Park. There's all those little fingers, and those take time to go down and explore. There's a lot there in Maine, and it's not as crowded in certain areas as one might think. Oh, here's a good one. A week in Maine for women friends. This sounds like a lot of fun. And depending on how you set up the trip, I always advise setting out expectations ahead of time. Like, do you have expectations to have meals together? How good of friends are you? Does somebody need some quiet time? Does someone need time to pick their own meals? I often travel in small groups, and sometimes planning in some alone time so people can pursue their own interests is super important, especially if you're all traveling in the same car together for hour after hour. Acadia National Park, I would always advise at least a minimum of 2 nights, 3 days if possible. And if you are looking at renting a car, check out Turo. Turo for me has been a really pleasant. You can identify exactly which car or vehicle you're getting. You know it's going to fit for women and their luggage, and that's the car you're going to show up and get. Whereas with a national rental like an Enterprise, Alamo, Hertz, whichever one you use, it's always just the flip of the dice. I always feel like, yes, you can reserve a class of vehicle, but we all know when you show up at the counter, it's kind of like they're looking through the keys and they're just seeing which car is going to fit that reservation. So it's not as specific as you might think. And when you have 4 people, you have 6 or 8 people, I would check out Turo.com as a good option. It's kind of like the Airbnb of car rentals. So I've chatted for quite a bit here, so I'm going to wrap it up, and I'll try to do more of these this week in my downtime. And as I mentioned, I lead tours, I write personal customized itineraries. So look me up. It's yourphototravelguide.com/contact April at aprilart.com. And let's jump on a call and see how I might be able to create the perfect trip for you. Thanks, guys.